JP, my friend, welcome back to the Way of Champions, bud.
Yeah, man, this is awesome to be back again with you, brother.
Well, you're churning out some good books here, man. There's no way I was going to let you slide by and not be on. And we were just chatting off camera beforehand about the craziness of the world, and I think your new book, The Culture System, is more important than ever. That if you're coaching a team or running a department or whatever, being really intentional about the culture that you build is absolutely critical, isn't it?
Yeah, I think not just to avoid problems, but just to maximize the impact and influence you want to have, and but be able to do that in a way that just doesn't drain you as a coach. I think there's so many things coaches have to manage as far as their time, and it's really, really hard for us to figure out how to actually build a culture without spending hours and hours and hours of our time figuring it out on our own. So I think it hopefully is a great solution or many solutions for coaches.
Well, I mean, I think if you asked anyone, would you like a better culture or know how to do it? I mean, everyone says, of course, right? But this is, I think, the issue is that people, even the best coaches say, yeah, it's all about culture. Or even the best businesses say it's all about culture. And they're very open with what they do because they know how hard it is, right? That it's like you said, it's a process, or as you call it, it's an operating system that you have to really be intentional about every single day with every single person that's involved in it. And so everyone's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, try it. How's that working for you?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing though, is so often in my experience as a coach, and then the coaches that I've had the privilege of supporting, is that I think I wouldn't say we leave it to chance. We don't leave it to chance. We try to be intentional. We try to do the right thing to build the culture. But at the end of the day, most years, we're like, oh, some years it's great, some years it's good. And if we're lucky, we have a couple good, great ones. But then a lot of times it just falls apart on us. And I think what we can learn is that if you put in the right system, the right operating system for your team to develop, the culture, to establish, those relationships and standards, to support those relationships and standards, and to enforce them, that you can have sustained success. You can have a great string of years as a team culture. And there's a lot of people out there that have been able to do that. And yeah, so it's about us trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the amazing thing about doing this as well is that a lot of people sort of their culture rises and falls with how many wins they have a lot of times, right? So when they have the talent and they're winning games, like, oh yeah, our culture's great, and then on the next year when that talent graduates, they're like, oh, the culture is terrible. But the people who are intentional about this are the culture is always great. And I remember last year we had a conversation, Jerry and I had a conversation with Steve Kerr. And as you and I are recording this, the Golden State Warriors are up 3-2 in the NBA Finals this year in 2022. But Steve was talking about after they'd gone to 5 straight finals and they had the season with a ton of injuries. They lost Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry got hurt. So they didn't have the talent. And they had the worst record in the NBA. And he said one of the things he was most proud of was the trade deadline rolled around. And he's like, in the NBA, when you're on a bad team that's not going to the playoffs and the trade deadline rolls around, you want out, And he said the thing he was most proud of was that no one wanted to leave. The people were getting traded for salary cap reasons and things like that. And nobody wanted to leave because even though they had an awful record, it was still a great place to be a basketball player. And I thought that was a really, really cool story about how great culture, people want to be a part of things that are great, regardless sometimes of the scoreboard.
Yeah, I love that story because I think it highlights kind of what that great culture that we're trying to build. It's that can withstand the moments or the periods where we maybe experience a drought in results that we want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if they had maybe 5 seasons like that, maybe then it would start to fall apart. But I think that's the strength of the culture, is how much losing can it withstand? How much conflict can it withstand, as well too, interpersonal, relational type conflict that might arise, because that always happens. I also, talk about this kind of towards the end of the book, but the greater our culture, the more it can elevate individuals that other cultures wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you look about like story of the Patriots and Randy Moss back in the day, there's a
Mm-hmm.
time where Moss was able to be successful there, and he was able to thrive where he wouldn't have other places, because the culture called him up to a higher standard, and got him out of maybe some of his selfish ways. And so I think that, yeah, those are some great indicators of your culture is operating at a high level, when you can lose a lot, or you can maybe bring a player in that might become toxic and just destroy the team cohesion in other places, but your culture lifts and elevates that individual.
Yeah, I think I remember Bill Belichick at that time saying, like, and that Tom Brady and a couple of the other leaders in that group saying, we can absorb a Randy Moss, right? We can bring him in. And, they had other people, who they couldn't, right? Aaron Hernandez, I think, was one. And obviously he had other major issues going on in his world. But this is the thing, is that when you create this environment, you as a coach make this decision that, yeah, we can take this uber talented person, and our culture, right? The Bulls with Dennis Rodman, or whatever, like, we can take this athlete and help him or her fit in, and it's going to be okay, because the culture will take care of it, and they're still going to be unique, and they're still going to be difficult, but we can harness their talent. Whereas a team without that Randy Moss or whatever, it just becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, I think, absolutely, you harness their talent, their potential, and hopefully, and I think for a lot of coaches, especially coaches that might be listening to your podcast, John, that this is where character development actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great to sit down and have maybe curriculum approaches towards character and talk about it, but character development happens through an experience where people are transformed by the culture itself, by the people within there, the leadership system that's in there, and through these experiences where maybe an individual struggles, they fail, they make mistakes, but they learn from those.
Mm-hmm.
That's where character has grown, is through, and leadership has grown. It's through experiential learning,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like in a classroom where we talk about it.
Right.
And so I think for people that really want to impact the lives of their athletes, you have to have a strong culture.
Yeah.
The culture help them grow in character, and also, in a lot of the research around mental health, it is one of the most powerful and therapeutic things for people that might be even struggling with mental health, which is obviously a big conversation now. John, is that that is a growing issue, and if they can be a part of a team culture where they feel connected, and they feel seen, and valued for who they are as a person, then they are getting a strong dose of healthy connection that's going to help them to be successful, not just on the court or on the field or on the ice, but in other areas of their life.
Mm-hmm. No, amen to that. Well, maybe let's take just a step back, because obviously this book came out of the work that you do on a one-on-one level with coaches. And for a number of years now, you've been mentoring coaches of all levels, throughout the year, and then getting those coaches together in these different retreats and stuff. So tell people just a little bit about what you do, because I think the last time we had you on the podcast was quite a while ago, for your book Calling Up. So, well, to talk about what you do and how my guess is that most of this has been developed over time, working with those coaches to develop their own team cultures.
Yeah, John, like you, I'm a voracious reader, book a week, for the last 7 years of my life. But like you as well, too, I've been fortunate to talk to and interview and get to know some of these amazing, writers, authors, leaders, thinkers, psychologists there, all these different people out there that are just, have taught us so much through their writing. But I think what, you alluded to there within the book is that it's not just the best ideas that I've read about or interviewed. Over the last 6 years, I've been able to work with coaches on a very personal level through weekly calls and a sounding board to take some of these ideas and tools that we've seen work in other cultures, other organizations in sports and business, healthcare, education, and we've been able to implement those. And I like to think of when it comes to the tools that you need to build a successful culture, there's probably what I've identified as around 20 to 25 different ones, but that I would say are just so common. Like in the book, I talk about, Captain Mike Abershoff, who I got to interview and have on my podcast. He turned around a Navy ship from the worst ship in the Navy to the best ship in the Navy. That's a story, but you're also seeing how, someone uses very similar strategies at Google, but they're also at the Chicago Cubs. Mm-hmm. So, you see all these strategies and very similar ones. Not everyone uses the exact same 20. They probably have around 5 to 10, but there's these common uses, there's these common strategies and tools, and you see them used across many different teams to build successful cultures. Well, I've taken these tools, I've helped take these and share them with coaches and help them to implement them within their teams. And I've been so fortunate to be able to do that at professional, collegiate, high school level, across multiple sports across the world. And so it's been such a powerful learning experience. And I joke like, man, 5 years, 6 years ago, when I started on this, I don't know why so many coaches allowed me to help, try these things out in the lab, but it's been a lab and we've learned from it. And we've been able to adapt and modify and come up with some best practices for that. And that's been huge. But then also we've been able to, I think, address a little bit of the big problem when it comes to culture, which is time. Mm-hmm. How do you stay consistent about these strategies and tools over the course of a busy season? How do you know where to start? And how do you stay consistent in your implementation and execution? And that's where we've tried to take a systematic approach, where we're trying to use a variety of tools and methods to establish the culture, but to support it and then also enforce it. And that's what has been really, really special about this book is not only are we getting the stories of great other leaders out there in the world, but you're also able to hear the stories of what a local high school coach did, or a club soccer coach, or a professional rugby team did, in South Africa, that I've been able to help support with some of these tools. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what really makes it special.
Yeah, and I think, let's face it, 99% of the people are working with the local high school team or their club soccer team or whatever. And it's really is important because this is super impactful for those kids, because they need it, right? For all the Randy Mosses and Dennis Rodmans, right? Those of us working on the grassroots level, we're the ones shaping behavior of human beings. This is absolutely critical. And maybe we happen to have that once in a generation talent that happened to stumble onto our, park and rec lacrosse team. But, then great, like, let's give him or her a leg up in what it means to be a great leader, to be a part of a team that has a higher purpose than just winning this game and stuff like that. It's, so I love, the writer Michael Lewis, Moneyball and Big Short and all that. He has, I love his podcast, and his new season on his podcast is about expertise. And he talks about how the true experts in many organizations are 6 levels down, right? So it's the person working in the basement that really knows how to solve your software problem or your organizational problem. And I often think so many athletic departments, the person who knows how to solve your, problem with your team is your tennis coach, who's been there just doing it. But the football coach never talks to the tennis coach because I don't coach tennis, right? But the tennis coach knows how to build culture. The tennis coach knows how to develop leaders. And so I think about, one of the most important things is look around you, because probably the answer to your question is right in front of you if you're willing to look deep enough.
I think that's a great point, because I think so often as coaches, a coach wins a national championship or an NBA title, and they come out with a book, and we all rush to get the book to see what we can learn from them. And absolutely, we have things to learn from them, from the Steve Kerrs, from the Coach K's of the world. But you just made a big point, which is we probably have more we can learn in many instances from the coach down the hall.
Yeah.
And we miss those opportunities. And I think that's, what's it's been so special about this is it's very hard to connect what Coach K does or what Steve Kerr does to what I do when I'm coaching middle school basketball or, club rugby. And we practice twice a week, for 3 months a year. And I think this book will help you do that. And one of the cool things about it in the process too, with what we've learned is, we've had feedback from coaches just on what is core and essential to implementation here.
Right.
Like how do you take a player onboarding strategy that you read about, and like, how do you make that so it can be done actually in like 10 minutes? Because that's pretty much most coaches have, is to build their culture might be 5-10 minutes before practice.
Yeah.
They can't take their team to some offsite retreat in the mountains.
They don't have a
to develop culture.
4-month off season. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think it's really critical that we understand how to do that in a practical way.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this 4 parts of your book, and part 1 is transformational leadership, and I think this really gets down to this idea that I know you and I both resonate with, is it starts with you to be to quote Joe Ehrman, to be a better coach, be a better you, right? And so it starts with leadership. What is that, and why is that the first step in the culture system?
Well, it's interesting. It is the first part of the book, which is the transformational leader and the philosophy. And it's funny because we almost cut it multiple times. And we both share an editor and Amanda, and it was kind of a conversation we had a few times. Is it essential? Is it important to be there? And it just kept going. You can't have the system without the leader and the philosophy set. And, and it wasn't actually until I'd actually started writing a lot of the book there in the last year that I really started to dive a little bit more into Toyota. Mm-hmm. And how, the Toyota Motor Corporation has built their business over the years. And they're really one of the not just most successful automobile companies of all time. They're one of those successable businesses, and mm-hmm. they're the Toyota production system, as it's called, the TPS, or now in many business areas, it'd be called lean. Mm-hmm. Those tools and those methods from Toyota production system are studied by everyone all across the world, and not just in, people that are trying to produce cars. I mean, Amazon is Amazon today largely because they can ship things because they've implemented TPS so well. Mm-hmm. But what people miss about the Toyota production system when they study it oftentimes, as I've learned, is they miss the philosophy behind it. Mm-hmm. And so there's the Toyota way, and then there's the Toyota production system. Mm-hmm. And if you take away the philosophy, their Toyota way, which is respect for people, it's built on these kind of a common core principles. Mm-hmm. If you take that away, it becomes very transactional, and it's not going to be as successful long-term. But if you only have a philosophy, but you don't actually have the tools or the systems to go out and implement that, then it'll fall short. So this part of the book is so critical because it's about helping you not only just develop your philosophy, because I think that's done through a lot of different variety of books or activities, but to take that philosophy, that mission statement or vision statement, those values, and to not let it become cliche, not become just some words on your wall there, but how do you bring that to life so that those values actually align with, and your behaviors actually align with with your values and your beliefs? And how do you stay disciplined in your own personal growth, become, like to your point and Joe Ehrman's point, become a better you? How do you continue to become a better you in season when, the pressure's on, you drop 3 games, you're up all night, you're doing all the scouting, you're on the road, and all these things that coaches face, and the stress and pressure. So it's about having some disciplines in our life so that we can stay grounded in that philosophy. Because if that doesn't happen, if you don't live that out, those values, then everything else will just fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I I have your just the book called up here, and it's interesting because I look at like this idea of transactional versus transformational. Transactional looks to get, while transformational looks to give. Um, Transactional uses others, transformational serves others. Um, Transactional asserts power over others, transformational empowers others. So it's a way of being, right? It's not just what you do, it's a way of being that when you do that, I think your athletes know, okay, he or she is in it for me, right? And if he or she is in it for me by the way they are, then I'm far more likely to be in it for my teammates and they're going to be in it for me. And I think that's the foundation, right? Because if you're asking your team to do one thing and you're doing something completely different, there's no way that they're going to buy into what you're asking them to do.
100%. And I like how you're bringing up that phrase, way of being. I remember when I was struggling with one of my years, with one of my teams, when I coached years ago, the culture was struggling, and I was really about accountability and holding them to a standard, and they weren't responding to that. And I remember hearing someone talk about, hey, well, you got to spend time building the relationship so that you can then hold them accountable. Now, the problem was I went out and I tried to just build a relationship so I could hold them accountable.
Yeah.
You know, it was really about, there wasn't authenticity in that. It was like, okay, so to build a great culture, I have to spend time with them. And so it was like ticking a box. And I wasn't really present. I really wasn't seeing the person. I was just seeing, okay, here we go, build a relationship with the athletes so that I can then get on them, a couple hours later. And the powerful thing is, if I enter into relationships like that, if I'm present with my players and I'm only looking to get what I can get out of them,
Yeah.
what I can, demand, what can I do to get more, more out of them? If I'm only doing that, they're going to sense that.
Right.
They will sense that. They will sense that inauthenticity of you trying to build that relationship. So it actually, yes, everything has to start. If you just get, these are some great relationship building tools on how to have one-on-ones and conversations, and you jump to that in part two, and you get those things, you try to go put them in play, but you haven't actually started to actually see your athletes as people and their needs, their desires, their challenges as legitimate as your own, you will fail. You will fail because it's only manipulation is what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. I had a couple coaches sent me these articles in the last week from athletic, I think it's called Athletic Director U. They just did this research and survey, and they look at sort of support staff and administrative staff, college coaches. So I just released it, basically this morning, right before we're recording it, about burnout. And this is just on the collegiate level, but the percentage of coaches and athletic directors and compliance people and athletic trainers and strength and conditioning, all the people who make the whole system work, their level of burnout, of disengagement, and sort of disenchantment with their work is through the roof. I mean, among some people, unless it's like their first year, it's in 60-70%. And I think this all kind of goes together, is that feeling of burnout comes from not feeling valued, not feeling respected, not feeling empowered, and also losing sight of your why. Like, why do I do this? And I think I think we have a huge wave of burnout coming from coaches. We're starting to see the tip of it now, people leaving the profession. But I think the people who support the coaches that we see in the newspaper are feeling it even more sometimes than those coaches. Are you hearing that, feeling that, seeing that with the people that you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the burnout there. You can be a great coach and you can still get fired these days, right? You could be doing all the right things. and that's a reality. But the funny thing I try to tell coaches is, hey, if when they're worried about their job, I said there's plenty of coaching jobs out there
Yeah.
because there's not a lot of people, looking to get into it, or they're leaving pretty quickly, like you said. And there's definitely been a change culturally, and I've seen the burnout. I've asked this. The question I think coaches ask, one of the questions coaches ask themselves the most now is this worth it?
Yeah.
Is this worth all the time and effort that I have to put into it, the sacrifice? And I always tell hey, I can't answer that for anybody. I think we have to ask, each ask ourselves that question, and ask our families, is this worth it? But back to your point, if you have a strong why and a strong purpose,
Mm.
and then you have the tools that you need to actually live that out, and you feel equipped to be able to do that, so that you can have an impact, then yeah, I think in a lot of cases it will become worth it for those individuals. But I think, to your point, we've lost our why, but also there's not enough. I used to want to be an athletic director, John, because I thought, man, it'd be great to just help develop this athletic department culture and help develop coaches and grow together. And then I realized, like, athletic directors don't do any of that in most situations.
No, they're
They're
just
too busy
scheduling and putting out fires and
putting out fires, running concession stands, and answering angry parent emails.
yeah.
So like, it's like, oh my gosh, that's not what I want to do at all, right? So
Yeah.
there's nobody there supporting coaches, which is why, what I feel like I've done, which is with the one-on-one support of coaches and the weekly calls. Like, when I started that, it was the answer to the question of, like, what do coaches really need? What did I need in some of my darkest moments of coaching? Now I answered that. I thought that would be like, oh, the coaches will work with me for a year. Like, people don't stop now. It's like, no, why would I ever, like, not have someone coaching me and supporting me and encouraging me on the journey,
Yeah.
and just that validation isn't necessarily of how great I am at what I do. It's more like there's just such this desperate need in coaching of support and helping people stay connected to their why on the journey.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You know what's really interesting? And I had this conversation yesterday with a coach who um, is sort of in charge of his athletic department's professional development, right? And I think what you just said, the idea in the ideal world, that would be the athletic director, right? That my job is to develop all these people and help them get better and create a place where this whole department can work together and get better. But they just don't, they do exactly what you just described. So this was probably in the last year, the fourth coach who had reached out, who was sort of in charge of this. Sometime this coach in particular had the full support of his athletic director. Most, sometimes they just had the sort of, yeah, go do whatever you want. And each one of these coaches, I said to him, they're all the strength and conditioning coach, because that's like the only other coach who sees everybody, right? It's the AD, and then the strength and conditioning sees all the other coaches, pulls them together, sees all their athletes, pulls them together. And so they're the ones saying, hey, can we get 20 books to do a book club with your book? Can you come in and do a talk for our school? And I thought that was really, really interesting. So I know there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who listen to this podcast. Don't underestimate your influence or how much you're needed if you really believe in this. Go out there and be the one who is a catalyst for change in your department, because everyone sees you and needs you and sees the good work that you do. And you're the only one who ties everyone together besides your AD, who is probably far too busy to do this type of stuff.
Yeah, there's a strength and conditioning coach out in Chicago, New Trier High School. His name is Jim Davis. And he was the same thing for me. He was so powerful at connecting with all the kids. And he really became this catalyst for growth and change within the school there in a positive way. I would also say that really for any coach within there, and we're running a retreat for a few athletic departments, this summer and this fall, and I was having a conversation with an athletic director there just a couple of months ago as we were preparing for it, and I said, "Listen, when at the end of this retreat, it would be great if all 30 coaches are 100% bought in on what we're trying to do here. But really what we need is just a few key influencers, people that really want to lead the charge and make this not this growth, this development, not a one-day event, but a year-long process. And it's just how we do things here, is that we share knowledge, we encourage each other, we support each other, we come watch each other's practices to give encouragement, also to give feedback, to offer new suggestions. That's what you're trying to drive towards, is this professional development's an everyday thing, not just, this once a year thing, or when we read the book for the, for our off season and have a conversation about it, and then we go our separate ways,
Yeah, no, totally. And I said to the guy yesterday, because he wanted to do all these interviews and everything, and I said, don't do more professional development than you're willing to hold people accountable for. Right? You're better off doing 3 sessions all summer and holding them accountable for all 3 than doing 10 and busting your tail and no one does any of it. I'm like, so be careful what you bite off, because very quickly, if people aren't held accountable for watching the interview or reading the book, then you're doing it for yourself at that point. Let me get back to your book. All right. So, but thank you for having that conversation with me. I was just curious what you were seeing. So we talk about transformational leadership, then we talk about establishing culture. And I think that's really important of coach versus team standards. Maybe unpack that for a little bit. How important is it that the coach has a part of herself or himself as what our culture is, and then how much does the team get to add to it?
Yeah, there's the old quote from John Wooden, that he used to say is, as he got older, he had a lot less rules and more suggestions, but he still had his rules, or his what I would call non-negotiables. He had 3 of them, and there's something around no profanity and being neat and clean, and never criticize a team. Be on time and never criticize a teammate. Right.
Yeah.
The cool thing about the coach standards, and let me explain that real quick, is of the non-negotiables, is that John Wooden had them. Captain Mike Abershoff had them on the USS Benfold. They were pretty much, don't do anything that would cause damage to the ship or cost us money. Pete Carroll has them. When I was at the Phoenix Suns facility back in October, I was spending the day there and watching practice, and I was talking to the coaches after practice, and I, looked up at Monty's desk, and right above his desk was his non-negotiables, which was pretty cool. You see everyone needs to have those standards. And what are they? They're standards from the coach that are just absolutely essential for us to be effective at our job. And for me, if people are late, the session is going to fall apart. If people aren't listening, I can't teach. If people complain, it's so negative, it just gets underneath my skin. Right. And so those become my 3 non-negotiables. And I will fight for those things. I will hold people accountable to those standards every single day. I got to communicate the purpose of them. I'm not just going to articulate them. The purpose being they're for the good of the team. They're there for the good of that individual. And they're also for the good of our relationship, because, these are 3 things I'm asking of you. But after that, everything else, if we can just really guide our players to set some standards based upon what it is they need to be successful. And every team's definition of success looks different. You might have a vision statement that you share. You may have core values that you distill within your team, but we still want to ask them, like, hey, what's success look like for us this year? What do we want this experience to be like this season as we pursue that championship? And you kind of get this idea of where you're wanting to head as a team, but then you turn around and go, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? And what do we need to not do if we want to get there? We want to realize that vision for our team. And when you ask players that, they're going to come up with the same stuff that you all would have thrown out there, but they become part of the process, and they understand the why, and they understand the connection, and they're more likely to, support each other and meeting those standards. And if you can agree upon some consequences in that conversation for failing to meet the standard, they're more likely to accept those consequences when they need to be enforced.
Yeah. A friend of mine once, he put it very succinctly. He said, um, the more people get to weigh in, the more likely they are to buy in. Right. And so the more say that they get in this is how we do things here, the more likely they are to enforce that themselves. And then as the coach, you just get to say, hold on a second, you all asked for A, B, and C, and it's not happening. So would you like to just let's cancel practice and we'll sit down and we'll change our core values? Or would you like to actually enforce the ones that you asked me to help you enforce? Right. And 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, that shifts the behavior. Right. That shifts the attitude. And because it's back on them. Like, hey, you asked for this. You there?
Oh, lost you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, I kind of look at it as almost, if you had an accountability partner, right?
Yeah.
Let's say at the beginning of the year, I want to lose weight. And I'm like, man, you know what? I need somebody else out there that could support me in that journey. And so I tell you, John, I say, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds this year because I want to be able to run this big run. And, this is what I need to do, will you join in on it? And will you, do some stuff too? Or maybe you have an event, but we're going to hold each other accountable. We're also going to support each other. We're going to check in with each other. And so that, when you do that, right, you welcome discipline. You welcome someone kind of, calling you out on some certain things when you're kind of going off the beaten track. And I think you're kind of doing that with your team. And at the end of the day, it ties into, and I know you've had Rolnick on the podcast for motivational interviewing. When you're using some of these very similar tools to the reality is the players want to change. Most players on our team, they have a desire to be, work harder, to be selfless, to do things the right way. And if we can just ask the right questions, we can help them to identify the path through changing, and it's using those motivational interviewing tools just in even that conversation with your team.
Oh my God, totally. And I like how you put that. Why did you sign up? Why are you here? Right. Well, yeah, I did want to change. I want to get better technically and tactically. All right. I also want to be part of something bigger than myself. Right. So, okay, well, if that's why you're here, then let me help you do that. Right. I like, your part 3 and 4 of the book, supporting your culture and enforcing the culture. Starting with support, like one of the things that great cultures have is, you call it team communication, and I would call it like a common language, right? So talk about that for a second. How important is it that we have a common language and a common purpose so that the culture, I mean, I think one of the problems, I think that your culture has made it as a coach when you're no longer the one enforcing the standards. Would you agree?
Yeah. The challenge is, have you created a place where people feel connected and safe enough, where they can challenge each other and know that it's not going to lead, that type of task conflict won't really lead to relational conflict. And to do that, you have to build, that's why it comes back to establishing a culture, which is standards and relationships. So there's the relationships, not just between you and the athlete, but between the athletes amongst the team. But then they need to be taught. I mean, honestly, we all need to be taught how to better support and hold each other accountable. And if you can teach them through some common language, which, some shared language, but also just teach them some simple tools around the power of affirmation, of letting someone know specifically what they did well. Right. I think something like that is huge. My wife works at Google, and they teach their employees that, you can give a peer bonus at Google, but you have to give specific evidence of what that person has done to help the team. That's affirmation now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just, I'll give them $250 because they're great, so you can teach your team how to give affirmation. You can also teach your team ways to remind of specific standards or certain behaviors that you want out there. And then you could teach them what I called notifications. I picked it up from Coyle's book, Culture Code, when he talks about the pilots and notifications. It's just giving feedback in a way that's non-judgmental. and just stating what they see. And so with a lot of the teams that I work with and I've seen and observed and studied, they have simple ways and simple languages for players to do that in a way that doesn't take always, this big, deep one-on-one on the sideline. Sometimes it is that type of conversation, but they can have these quick, short bursts of communication where people aren't offended, but they know that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing to encourage the right behaviors.
I remember watching Jesse Marsh, who coaches Leeds now, the manager of Leeds in the English Premier League. It's part of the Red Bull system. He had different sayings and things. And like one of them was like, let's say you were down a goal with 5 minutes left and you just had to throw everything to it there. The word they used to use was McEnroe as like the tennis player, and McEnroe, right, symbolizes and epitomizes a way of being that we're just going to go nuts in this moment, right? And we're either going to lose as we're already losing, or the other team's going to crumble. All right. But I always thought that was such a funny one, like McEnroe. But people who know who John McEnroe is like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. I got it. So the last part, right, enforcing the culture and transformational discipline, and another, you talk about losing the opportunity or losing the privilege of being part of this group. And I think this is one of the most important things that we do, right? Is that we help people who are not meeting the standards to change behavior. How do you advise coaches to do that? Because that becomes a one-on-one thing, right? That's when the coach intervenes and says, okay, look at who you are. Is that who you want to be? So how do we do that?
One of the things that probably, I wouldn't say irritates me because that might sound a little bit strong, but that frustrates me is when we have leadership principles or principles in life that we have no way to really instill the principle within our team. And one that's popular I often hear is, hey, it's a get to, not a got to. Right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Right?
Get to versus have to. Yeah. I wrote that down here. I wrote have to, but yeah, I like that.
I don't, we get to go to practice, right? That's great. It's a great principle to talk about to your team, but do you really reinforce that? And I remember hearing, I think someone gave us a speech around that to maybe the Alabama football team, a couple of years ago. And I think that's great, but do we really reinforce that principle within our culture? Well, the way that we discipline, the way we hold people accountable can be a way to reinforce that it's a get to. You get to come out here and work hard. But if you choose to not work hard, right? If you choose to not have the right attitude, you choose not to meet our standards, we're gonna give you a nudge, we're gonna give you some encouragement. But if you can't correct, then we're gonna have you step off. And because this is a get to. You get to come here and work hard. You get to be part of this team. It's a privilege. It's an opportunity to get better. And so, one of the many tools I talk about within transformational discipline is what I would call progressive consequences within a training session. And they're simply logical consequences, but done in a progressive way where, rather than, okay, well, John's not working hard today, I guess we'll see you tomorrow. It's more like, hey, John, just step out of the drill. We'll see you in the next drill. Or even smaller than that. Hey, John, just let's do that again. But let's do that with the effort that I know you're capable of doing or giving. And so it's not, DEFCON 5 right at the end. We're not like, oh, here we go. Like, John, you're out of here. But we're allowing ourselves and the player, we're giving that player opportunities to self-correct their behavior before it's just like they're gone, and so often if we don't enforce standards in a progressive way, then we get to that moment and we're all really frustrated. The player is really frustrated. We're really frustrated. And then we don't ask, then we kick them out of practice, which I don't believe in kicking kids out of practice. I believe that you just let them know they've lost the opportunity to get better today and that we'll see you tomorrow, and there's a very different experience and feel to that type of discipline. And at the core, we're trying to reinforce our values within this type of discipline system, but also we're trying to have it feel different. And discipline doesn't have to feel always negative or bad. If we just bring awareness to someone's shortcomings, they're already probably just going to be a little bit disappointed themselves. We don't need to load on extra disappointment or shame or guilt, in that moment. That's not motivating them, or at least it's not motivating them in the right way. It might just be motivating extrinsically.
Yeah, totally. And I think about, right, people listening that are working with different ages and stages of kids, right? That collegiate or certainly collegiate, but the high school athlete has the maturity and the experience to understand that 8-year-old or 9-year-old might not, right? And if anyone's coached those ages, you get these super disruptive kids, and they can drag down your whole practice and whatever. And I like this idea of progressive, of like, first pull them aside and say, now listen, every time I'm talking, you're talking, or you're not doing what we're asking you to do. So you're disrupting everything. So I'm just telling you now, the next time you're going to have to sit out the drill. Right. And the next time you're going to have to sit out the drill, and then you're going to have to sit out the rest of practice. Right. And you're not going to get to do A, B, and C. And it's that, why is that 8-year-old or that 9-year-old that way? Well, because maybe they don't have any discipline or structure at home. Maybe they go to some school where there's no discipline or structure, and that's okay. But this goes back to part one, as that coach, this is still my team. This is still my program. That's nice that in other parts of your life, you're allowed to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But because you get to be a part of this program, that no longer flies. And it's amazing how usually kids get in line when they value it. Right. And now you're changing behavior.
And it also ties a little bit too with the support piece, to go back to that as well too, John, because that individual that struggles with that behavior, you may enforce that standard, but you don't sacrifice the relationship.
Yeah.
No relationship's worth sacrificing over any single behavior.
Right.
However, you're able now to have a follow-up conversation after practice, before the next practice. And you're able to say, hey, you're really struggling with your focus in our practice sessions. What's the issue? And they may give you, well, maybe it's a personal thing. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're, they don't have snacks after school. I mean, there's all these things there. Maybe it's your training is really boring. You talk too long as a coach, and you need it. Well, coach, is just really hard when you go on these 5-minute, tirades or explanations. I just, so all of a sudden you start to focus on solutions that don't even really require consequences. Yeah. And when we talk about these progressive consequences, coaches get, I think, a little bit like overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to be asking kids every drill or every practice to leave. And it's like, no, when you do these things right, when you build the relationships, when you support the behavior, and you enforce in a very kind of firm way, it naturally flows, and the behavior change just starts to come, and it gets easier and easier over time.
Yeah, totally. And again, I think those are our most rewarding moments as a coach, when you see that kid change his or her behavior, their way of doing things, and they become a different person. They become a different teammate. And, part of coaching is sometimes they won't say thank you until 10 years later. Coaching is not the business where you should expect immediate gratitude, or teaching, for sure. I mean, that is one thing I've recognized is the gratitude often comes in the form of a wedding invitation 10 years later or something like that. It's like, oh, good, they got it. Because in that moment, it wasn't always pretty.
Yeah, there's a story I share towards the end of it where of my book, a college basketball coach had to do the very hard thing of removing a player from the team and ask them to, require them to transfer. And that was really hard. But for the coach to stay true to his mission, which was to develop young men, to develop good husbands and fathers out of his players, was his mission statement. To have him to do that, he couldn't sacrifice the culture, because he understood the culture helps to develop those people. But he enforced that standard with that individual in a way that was respectful of them. It was hard for them. They didn't take it well at the time, but it didn't take 10 years, John. It was maybe 6 months later that they ran into each other at another game, and it was all hugs. And it was
Yeah.
powerful to see that. And this player's level of respect for the coach, because at the end of the day, when we enforce standards the right way, we've had it established. They knew they'd already agreed to it. They already know the consequence. It becomes clear that it wasn't necessarily your choice. You weren't, this wasn't punishment. You weren't doing it to them. They did it to themselves,
Yeah.
and this is just a consequence of their behavior.
Right.
And that's the big difference between, punishment and consequences.
Yeah. I always think of the student who says about their teacher, "Oh, she failed me." Right. Really? How did she fail you? You're the one who didn't turn in the 4 assignments. You're the one who didn't write the paper. You're the one who got a 62 on your test. Like, how did the teacher didn't you kind of fail yourself? And they just happened to record the grade for you. So yeah. JP, any final thoughts before we talk about how people can get the culture system? Any final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
John, I would say this, that I have to give a shout out to, there's obviously a lot of people that have been supportive of me on my journey, you being one of them. And also just great minds that I've been able to read and to tap into and interview. And then all these coaches that allowed me to work with their teams. I just, even last year alone, I worked with 28 different coaches and their teams. But there was also 10 special individuals that signed up for early edition of my book, which was a brutal, over 100 something thousand words. And it's almost half of what it was. And when they read it, they had to read it on Google Docs. But these were coaches that I'd worked with and supported, pro coach, college coach, athletic director, high school coaches, business CEO. And these 10 individuals went through the book and I asked them to be brutally honest with me. Where does it fall short? Where can we be more clear? How did we make this more implementable for the average reader?
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that's where the strength of what we've written, and I say we because they've been a part of that process, comes with the book. And I think it makes it special. Is that I had this whole team of actual real leaders at different levels and different sports helping me write it. And so I'm very, very grateful. Probably more grateful than I am proud, of this book, just because I had so many amazing people on this journey these last few years to help me put it together.
Well, it's really good, really actionable, lots of cool graphics too, and charts and everything. So I appreciate the book. The book is The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture. JP, thanks so much for being on The Way of Champions. How can people grab the book? What's the best way for them to find it? Just came out.
Yeah, you can hop on Amazon. You can go over to myculturesystem.com. There's loads of, you get a free chapter there. There's just loads of other information around the book as far as some additional resources, checklists, PDF handouts that just help you to really identify how you will implement it, and then stay on track to really execute the system that you put together for yourself.
And how can people follow your work? These days, are you on Instagram or Twitter, or where can people follow the work that you're doing on a more daily basis?
I occasionally hop on Twitter at JPNERBUN, or you can just head on over to TOCculture.com, which, we got a newsletter and articles and some other resources out there for coaches.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, man. Again, congrats on the new book. It's always great to talk to you many, many time zones apart. And I wish you luck getting this out there, because I know coaches who read this will have a far more rewarding season next season than maybe they did this year. So great stuff, man. Great to see you.
Yeah, appreciate it, John.